Happy Friday, everyone. Welcome. My name is Piper Hendricks, and I'm the CEO of Stories Change Power. I have heard it said that we should always carry our sun with us, but where I am right now, there's actually sunshine out, and that is always helpful to have actual sunshine. So I hope wherever you are today, whether it's internal or external, maybe both, you are enjoying some sunshine. Throughout 2026, we are recognizing the 250th of our Declaration of Independence and how our work boosts civic engagement, builds civic muscle, and expands civic imagination. Today, I am so excited for you to hear about the ways that stories, including those from Hollywood, shape the way we understand government, including stories that you would never guess have anything to do about government. So, before we get into that, there are 5 things you need to know. One, we have captions on. Please use those if they are helpful to you. 2, we will keep the chat open throughout. The chat is only for our human friends. If you are AI, we are in the process of either kicking you out or double checking that that is in fact AI. We will send you a message. If you don't respond, we err on the side of caution because we do keep the chat just for our human friends, and the chat will not be shared with the recording. If you have questions, we welcome those anytime during the webinar. You'll see a little box at the bottom with a Q for your Q&A. Put those in and we will answer at the end. If we run out of time, I know there will be probably a lot of questions about today's topic. We will aim to get back to you either in a follow-up newsletter or in our LinkedIn. So rest assured, we are not ignoring your question. We just aim to respect time and keep the webinar to 1 hour. Fourth, if you are interested in the ways that stories can bridge divides, we will have a 4-week course kicking off later this month. And at the end of the webinar, we will share an incredibly generous discount to join us for that course. Fifth and finally, You Are Off Camera is a webinar, so enjoy the space. You do not have to worry about anything other than just tuning in and being present for what we're going to be talking about today. And with that, it is an absolute pleasure to introduce today's speaker. Melody Mohebi is a PhD in strategy, evaluation, and a learning expert with deep applied experience in enhancing organizational capacity, leveraging media, and driving impact. She was formerly the Director of Measurement and Insights at Participant, the leading global media company dedicated to entertainment that stands at the intersection of art and activism. At Participant, Melody led the development of the company's measurement approach, advising teams on capacity strategy design and overseeing evaluation and reporting. She supported campaigns for film and episodic titles, including American Factory, America to Me, Dark Waters, Descendant, Radical, RBG, and Roma, just to name a few. Melody earned her PhD in social policy from the London School of Economics and Political Science, where she also taught sociology and social policy. Her book, The Formation of Civil Society in Modern Iran, was published in 2014 and investigates the development of contemporary Iranian civil society and the role of public intellectuals. Welcome, Melody. I am so happy that you are with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Before we begin, we like to know who is in the virtual space with us. So there will be a 2-question poll popping up for folks who have joined our webinars before. This first question will be familiar. We ask about how long you've been an advocate or used your civic muscle. And we invite you to define that very broadly. How are you engaged in your community? That may be in traditional advocacy, that may be in supporting folks in your neighbors, beyond. However you'd identify that. Maybe you're brand new to this, less than 2 years, all the way up to over 10 years. And then there are some folks who may say, I don't think I'm using my civic muscle yet. And you are very welcome here too. Our second question is one that, spoiler alert, it may dampen your sunshine a little bit today, but we're asking what percentage of people in the United States are unable to pass a basic civic literacy test? And you've got options there, 10%, 25%, 50%, 70%. As always, if you are driving, ignore the poll. Please focus on the road. Otherwise, we will invite folks to keep. I see a lot of answers coming in. We'll give folks a few more seconds here. Let's see. I don't want to cut anybody short. If we accidentally do, feel free to pop your answers into the chat. But we'll go ahead and close the poll in, let's say, 3, 2, 1, and then we will end that and publish the results. Melody, it looks like we have a good variety of folks here, really a mix, about 20% each on people who are new, are a good while in using their civic muscle, a good long while, and pros, and then a few who work in a different field and aren't using their civic muscle. So welcome, everybody. That is helpful for us to know who's where. And then for the question about the percentage of people in the United States who are unable to pass a basic civic literacy test, we have about 25% who thought it was 25%, 40% thinking it was 50%, and 35%. This is a lot of numbers. I don't know if this is helpful. The answer is it is 70%. 70% of people in the United States are unable to pass a basic civic literacy test. So we are grateful for you to be here today and hear more about stories that can encourage people to be more civically engaged. And with that, I will stop sharing this poll. Melody, pass over to you. And thank you so much again. We're looking forward to hearing all that you have to share.
Thank you so much. All right, we're gonna go to the screen share. Wait for the slide to pop up. All right, well, thank you so much, Piper. I'm really glad to be here with the Stories Change Power community. Today, I'm going to be sharing what we've learned about how stories shape people's sense of agency and imagination for the future, and what that means for democracy. I'll start with highlights from our research with Harmony Labs, and then I'll be joined by our Democracy 2076 founder and executive director, Aditi Juneja, for the Q&A. Before I get into the research, though, I'll just briefly share what brought me to this work. In my career in social impact, I kept coming back to the same truth, that stories are one of the most powerful forces shaping what people believe and how they act. At Participant Media, where we produced movies like Spotlight, Roma, and Judas and the Black Messiah, as Piper mentioned, I led impact measurement and saw firsthand that the stories that move people weren't just the most important ones, they were the ones that people actually chose to watch. And my work at Democracy 2076 builds on that. Our narrative approach started with a simple question. What stories are audiences already drawn to? And how do those stories shape what they think is possible? Because if we want to reach people, we can't start from what we wish they cared about. We have to start from where they already are. And there's a more personal reason that this work matters to me. From years of studying and working on Iran, I've seen what happens when people lose the ability to imagine a better future. When that imagination collapses, so does the sense that you can shape what comes next. And that's really a challenge we're facing in the US right now. Trust is low, the information environment is fragmented, and people are tuning out of traditional sources like the news. But people are still engaging with stories through entertainment, through social media, and through culture. So the question becomes, how do we tell stories that don't just raise awareness, but actually help people recognize that there's a problem with how our democracy operates, um, have a sense of agency for their own role in it, and be able to imagine a better future. And that's the focus of our Imagining program at Democracy 2076. Working in collaboration with partners like Harmony Labs, we develop research and tools to help storytellers, including advocates, understand their audiences, reach beyond them, and tell stories that strengthen agency and imagination in service of a more resilient democracy. And before we dive in, I want to just get a quick read from you with two short polls. The first is, I understand my audience beyond traditional demographics. We'll just give a few moments for that. We can see the results. I'm not seeing the results for that, but if we can, oh, there we go. All right, so this, again, we have a good mix between neutral, especially within the neutral, and agree of having an understanding of the audience beyond traditional demographics. If we can go to the second poll, and this one is, I know how to design messages or campaigns that increase people's sense of agency and imagination for the future. And if we can see the results for that one. All right. So this one is a little bit less. So we've got more on the kind of the disagree, neutral, and agree. So, and we do have 21% with strongly agree. So hopefully we'll be able to give you a little bit of some more tools, tips and tools over the next hour. And this gives us a bit of a baseline. Thank you. All right. So going on to the next slide, using what we've learned from entertainment, just don't know if my slides aren't transitioning as fast as everyone else's. There we go. So using what we've learned from entertainment, we translated the insights that we got from Harmony Labs into practical tools, developing 3 sets of questions for storytellers. One is for those developing entertainment content, one for entertainment executives who decide what gets made, and one specifically for democracy advocates. The question set for democracy advocates, that's the one that we're going to focus on today, was developed with input from the Democracy Communications Collaborative, or DCC, and is designed to help you think about how to apply these insights in your own storytelling and campaigns. We're going to walk through those questions together using a concrete example of what it might look like to build a storytelling campaign around the upcoming 250th. The goal is to make this as practical as possible so you can see how these insights translate into real decisions. And throughout, we'll invite you to engage using the polls and the chat function. And as Piper mentioned, if you have a question, please post them in the Q&A and we'll answer those at the end. And you will get links to the report and the question set at the end as well. Okay, so here's the first of the 6 questions we're going to walk through. And it is, do you know where your audience is starting from? Before thinking about messaging or solutions, this is about understanding how your audience sees the world, their assumptions, their frames, and what they believe is possible. Now, audiences don't choose content randomly. Okay. They choose based on what's important to them, based literally by definition on what they value. And algorithms learn that about viewers and recommend them content that they're most likely to engage with. So what you think is important shapes who you want to be and who you admire. So the hero of your story of democratic change depends directly on what kind of change you want. On the slide are the values-based audience quadrants developed by Harmony Labs, which you can see across their research. People in the top half see the work of systems change as transformation, and the bottom half see it as restoration. The people on the left think about the we or the collective, while the right half think about the me or the individual. You'll see these 4 audiences again and again here. These values are based on Shalom Schwartz's universal human values, and they've been validated in more than 80 nations, and they describe the American variation in both American media choice and political orientation. And so something that's helpful to know is that Americans are equally distributed across these 4 quadrants. Now, the values-based audience quadrants give cultural context to demographic groups. We'll go into a bit more detail with each quadrant, but for a quick preview, we have these heat maps that show where people in the US over-index. On this slide, for example, you see how younger people are more likely to be in the autonomy valuing upper hand right quadrant that gravitates toward outsider transformers, while white audiences tend to be drawn to stories about insiders on the left. This next set of heat maps shows political orientation and voter propensity. Here you see how those who vote Republican are more likely to want stories of restoration, while registered Democrats are more likely to be in the community valuing upper left quadrant, who like stories about insider transformers. And those who are least likely to vote fall in that autonomy valuing right quadrant, who enjoy stories about outsider transformers. Going on to the next poll, I want to get a sense of kind of what audiences your organization most reach. Just if you're not doing this type of work, you don't have to answer, but we'll just give a few moments. All right. All right. So I'm seeing, a lot of people in the community slide on the community quadrant. When the DCC actually did their research, they did found that a lot of democracy organizations are those who are reaching those who value community. So It's interesting that no one's kind of reaching those in the autonomy quadrant. All right. So going into the heroes, it's important to understand what hero your audience needs. All right. And here's why knowing your audience and heroes matters. When storytellers understand the kind of stories people are already choosing to watch, they can reach a much wider range of audiences, including those who may think very differently from them. Whether you're a creative or a democracy advocate, knowing what media people opt into can help you decide what stories will resonate with them. And you can use the entertainment media that people are drawn to for inspiration as you tell your own story, or even use clips or characters for connection. Now, those who like transformation and insider heroes generally most value community. This is the audience that's disproportionately college educated, white, and votes Democrat. They like shows like The West Wing, The Diplomat, Madam Secretary. And while these shows are often described as about government, they're really about systemic insiders. Insider transformers patiently work in the service of progress by crafting the rules that hold our institutions accountable. That's their version of democracy. And it's really the obsession of anyone who's watched The West Wing more than 1,000 times that I feel like some in this room might have done that. And again, this is the audience that the DCC found democracy organizations are disproportionately talking to. And we saw in the poll as well. Now, some audiences like Transformers were also outsiders. This is the audience that's disproportionately under 25 and has a low propensity to vote. This autonomy-oriented crowd watches lonely underdog heroes who fight for an in-group of family or friends. These heroes' goals are to help systems adapt to include previously marginalized people or ideas. So it's The Boys, The Hunger Games, 13 Reasons Why, and Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. For outsider transformers, forcing your voice to be heard, your contribution to be recognized, and your community to be protected through a new world order, that's democracy to them. And you know what else is democracy? It's restoring first principles. Audiences who like insider restorers are primarily value order. This is the audience that is disproportionately non-college educated and votes Republican. They like heroes who improve systems while preserving their core structures, like the insider restorers we see in Space Force, Deep Space Nine, and It's a Wonderful Life. And this is also the audience for crime procedurals because the work they honor is doing the next needed thing. There's actually a quiz in Harmony Labs from their narrative observatory where you can find out which quadrant you're in. I'm one of the kind of order loving tough cookies, which makes a lot of sense given that I've watched kind of every episode of Law and Order, plus every fire department drama out there. So if you do have any recommendations, please let me know. And finally, we have the ones who prefer outsider restorers. The audience who likes watching outsider restorers values authority and command. This is the audience that's disproportionately men and includes the MAGA base. It also over-indexes amongst people of color who share the individualistic and restorer approach to change. The stories they engage with feature fiercely independent outsiders holding systems accountable rather than insiders or collective action. They want the kind of restoration that exposes corruption and returns systems to their original principles, like those featured in The Accountant 2, Breacher, and Rebel Moon, Part 1. So I invite you to join the conversation and pick a hero who has or is trying to change systems that you might highlight for an organization's 250th campaign and put their name in the chat. As you're thinking about this, I would consider that these don't have to be kind of well-known public figures. They can be, but they can also be your everyday heroes. Might be hard workers, community members, or people who hold leaders accountable. Just give a few moments in case anyone wants to share. All right, I see someone there. If you want to kind of describe a little bit more about them, that'll be great as well. So folks can see kind of how you would be describing this hero and which audience you might think they resonate with. I think it's really important that for the heroes you consider if they're the type of hero again that resonate with either your existing audience or the type of hero that might resonate with an audience that you're trying to reach and maybe you haven't reached them. And I know there's a lot to think about, but these are kind of the questions that what we hope kind of help you kind of again expand your audience or again go a little bit deeper with your existing audience. Something else to consider is if you can pair or add in different types of heroes in the stories that you're telling. In the entertainment research, we found that people seeing different types of heroes helped increase their willingness to work across difference. So think about a city official that is coming together with a community organizer or a local journalist coming together with a career civil servant. If you're thinking in the kind of broader space, you can think about is Mayor Mamdani as a kind of outsider transformer or LeBron James as a insider transformer for some communities. So again, thinking about either celebrities or when it comes to people like the everyday heroes, it might be a teacher who's trying to help a school system.
Yeah, the examples in the chat are really good. So, Gwen, you have this one of Laura Wooten, who's a voting champion, tough cookies, because she served as a poll worker for 70 years. So, if folks will remember, the insider restorers are people who work inside of the system and are trying to restore it to its proper functioning. So, a poll worker would be exactly that kind of person. And this audience, again, tends to be more likely to be non-college educated, more white, more Republican, not 100%, but like more over indexes in that way. So I think the opportunity here is to be thinking about if you have a particular audience that you're talking to based on demographics, race, political affiliation, understanding how how that maps onto the type of hero that that audience needs to hear. So for this group, most people said that they're with the people power audience. That audience is disproportionately college educated, democratic, and white, and so this audience tends to like insiders who are transformers. So like Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, they have all are longstanding insiders in a political system, and they've said they were trying to transform that system. And so that means if you're trying to reach other types of audiences, they're going to need different types of heroes. Donald Trump, we often think of as an outsider restorer. He came from outside of the system and says he's trying to restore it, literally make America great again. So it's a way of trying to identify the fact that the type of hero that resonates with you is not necessarily going to be the one that resonates with your audience. Yeah, exactly. As a Doge civil servant, it's been an identity shift for you to go from exactly out from insider transformer to an outsider restorer. Exactly that. Exactly that. And that's part of what this is, that people's theory of change, their location in a system can change over time. And it also means then the types of heroes you might be looking for might change over time. And so that's part of how to think about this as you're thinking about what a 250th campaign might look like and who you're trying to reach out to.
And you might be thinking again in terms of whether they're an insider or outsider, what's the system? Because someone for some one person might be considered an insider, but to someone else might be considered an outsider. And again, thinking about these shifts. Right. So another question to ask is if you're in your storytelling efforts, if you know how to make a hero fall from grace. And so we just talked, Doge was just mentioned. Going on to the next slide, we ask this question because we've encountered moments when advocates have wanted to show the shadow side of a popular figure and how they may not be the hero that people make them out to be. So, for example, as Doge was shutting down entire agencies and using opaque tactics, we saw a desire by some to figure out how to make Elon Musk fall from grace with audiences who saw him as a hero. And our entertainment research actually provided some answers. We asked Harmony Labs to test out what causes each quadrant to shift their opinion about heroes. What are the actions that they can make that make them stop being the hero in the eyes of their audience? And these are the kind of common courses of action for each hero type that make audiences stop rooting for them as heroes. So Elon Musk was considered an outsider transformer hero for some. So the fork in the road for these types of characters in film and television is when they're faced with the fact that everyone is ultimately selfish, but they fall out of favor with their audiences when they exploit others before being exploited. Now, there is a risk when doing this, which requires some intentionality. If you turn a hero into a villain, you do risk reducing your audience's belief in democracy. In that case, it's important to offer them an alternative hero who fits their hero archetype. And this is, thinking about this insider outsider kind of these quadrants, this is why we saw Trump Zoran voters. For the voters who supported Trump because they liked Elon, it would be Zoran replacing Elon as he's the same outsider transformer hero type. So now that we've gone through the heroes and how to make someone fall from grace, we need to talk about the actual story, which leads us to the narrative arc for democracy. And this gets at the heart of separating story from message. So a message tells people what to think, but a story shows how something works over time. So, for example, it's the difference between stating the economic system is failing working families, that's a message, versus telling a story about how a parent who can't afford daycare for their young child can vote for a mayor who will bring about free childcare so that the city is affordable for families from all income levels. It helps audiences understand not just what the idea is, but how the change happens. And our research isolated three parts of the plot: the conflict, the action, and the resolution. What we're going to go through in the next few slides is how different audiences need different plot lines to help recognize that there's a problem with democracy, increase their sense of agency by seeing someone else taking action for our democracy, and a resolution that helps them imagine a better future for our democracy. And something really interesting we learned about from our entertainment research is that you don't need to talk about government to talk about democracy. So in your stories, you don't need to explicitly say that you're talking about democracy or government, as long as you're talking about systems. So this might be schools, hospitals, journalism, sports teams. It's really helpful that given that we often hear people say that even using the word democracy feels really loaded. So the third question we offer advocates is to ask if your story is showing a challenge with the system in which you're operating. And this is something that advocates actually do very well. A big part of understanding there's a problem is realizing that there's always work to be done, not just now, but always, because democracy is about representing the views of the majority, which changes over time. For most audiences, seeing systems changing is what moves them. And this is something, again, advocates typically do well in their messaging and storytelling. But again, different audiences need to see different types of problems. You can see the different types of stories that help different audiences understand there's a problem with democracy on this slide, like outlaws and rule followers making things better for the autonomy valuing audience. Now, kind of going back to your hypothetical 250th campaign and some of the figures that you kind of pointed out already, I'd be curious if you'd want to type in the chat what you might seek to highlight in the 250th campaign, that kind of the problem that your hero might be tackling. So for the type of campaign where you're talking more broadly about history and kind of the future of America, it's probably not a specific piece of legislation or an action, but something kind of broader. As you're thinking or typing, just to share that the value of the entertainment research is that it shows the archetypes of problems that voters are familiar with. So one question to be asking is, can you break through by fitting into the existing kind of narrative frames that people are used to? For example, Succession, where you have concentrated power with little accountability shaping public life. The series shows that the issue isn't just bad actors, it's the structures that reward certain behaviors and insulate decision makers.
Why don't we, I see that folks haven't had the opportunity to type into the chat. Why don't we just give everyone a second, Melody, to share for the heroes that were mentioned? Someone talked about Daryl, George Washington, Laura Wooten, Michael Lewis. What are the types of problems that you might be talking about or surfacing? And if you didn't type in a hero into the chat, please feel free to share what you think a problem that you might highlight during the 250th might be. And it could be a problem from the past, a problem in the present. Hmm. Yeah, insiders making things worse is definitely a common problem type we see in Hollywood. People feeling like the government isn't working for them or benefiting them. isn't always something that helps. In our research, wasn't something we saw that showed up that helped people understand that there was a problem. But I could totally see that just because it didn't show up in the Hollywood research doesn't mean it doesn't help. Yep. These are all problems that definitely economic stability, voting rights, government not working for them. These are all the types of problems you could highlight in a 250th campaign.
Absolutely. I think this idea of power in America feeling concentrated in the hands of the few, or people feeling that standards have slipped. So these are fantastic examples. Well, once you kind of have your problem, the next step is trying to show your heroes striving to change the rules of their world. So if we can go to the next slide. So the fourth question to ask is if you include someone trying to actually change the system. Because watching ordinary people exercising agency improves audiences' sense of agency. So, for example, stories like Ted Lasso or Top Gun Maverick. Now, this means that storytelling where the system is rigged, is where that is the only message and no one even gets to try, risks reinforcing the belief that people can't work across differences to solve problems and creates backlash toward audiences' views of a healthy democracy, leaving them feeling cynical and powerless. So going back to kind of the problems we talked about and the heroes, I'd be curious if you can share kind of what actions your hero might be taking to solve a problem and think about if it's the type of action that inspires your specific audience quadrant. Give you all a few moments to put your ideas in the chat. See kind of the example that was given around fighting ageism within the system.
Yeah, or even for any of the ones that you guys mentioned before, you talked about problems like voting rights or lack of economic stability or polarization. Who are examples of people who are trying to actually take action to change that?
Love the idea of maybe bridging with other organizations. It's fantastic.
I know many of you work at organizations that are doing this. Yeah, exactly. Laura Wooten continued to be there and make sure people in our community could vote and made the experience positive, even in the face of the problems and the challenges. So she was definitely someone who was taking action. When we think of real life heroes, I see Day mentioned Robin Hood. But who are the people in our modern environment? Could you think of someone like Mark Cuban, who is, if that's an example you like, of someone who is trying to disrupt pharmaceutical prices? What about the organizations that are running pilots with guaranteed basic income? Who are the people actually working to bring about solutions and taking actions to bring about changes? Yeah, someone mentioned Clive in the If You Say So group, Return to Higher Education has been focusing his time in education and educating and inspiring young people. Yeah, Daryl brings our ancestors' teachings to modern day organizational leadership. Amazing.
An example I had from kind of the entertainment world is Parks and Rec and Leslie Knope being fully inside the system, but again, constantly pushing against its limitations, changing processes, building coalitions, and reimagining what government can do, and thinking about other kind of real life heroes that you might have seen and being able to spotlight them.
People really need to see people trying. So if we can't give examples of who is going to try to change the system, it goes back to the warning Melody gave that if we only talk about the problems, it leaves people feeling nihilistic and like democracy doesn't work. We have to show people trying to change the system.
And I think it's yes, Leslie Knope.
Mm.
I also have a soft spot for her. I think one of the things that we talk about is again your everyday heroes that you don't have to be a cop or bitten by a radioactive spider in order to change things. And there are people around us that are doing so many things. And how can we kind of shine a light on them? And so finally, going to the next slide, what's really important is that you offer solutions. You need to ask if your story is talking about these solutions. And different audiences need different types of stories to see a path forward. And not all of them will respond to the same vision of change. Our research shows that people are better able to imagine a better future when they're shown what a change actually looks like, not just told that it's needed. And that can be a future scenario or simply a present day story where different choices lead to different outcomes. Because without that, audiences are more likely to default to cynicism and disengagement. So again, for advocates, it means your story can't stop at naming the problem or just saying like someone's trying something, but what are they trying to do? What's that future vision? And this is especially important for audiences who gravitate toward outsider restorer narrative. As a reminder, that's the lower right-hand quadrant, and it's the audience that's disproportionately made up of older non-college Republicans. They are drawn to stories about fixing what's broken and returning things to a better state, but that can often default to backward-looking solutions. So the opportunity is to meet that instinct, but redirect it. So instead of restoring to a mythologized past, show what it looks like to restore core ideals like fairness, accountability, and opportunity. And so I'm curious if you can share kind of what that future for your hero might be, what might look like, what might they be working towards? And is that the type of future that moves your audience? Well, I love that idea about the spotlighting public servants changing the game. I'll definitely be checking that out.
Yeah, it's really interesting seeing the like Susie, you're talking about. It's not interesting to regular people, like, but the whole point is that the heroes that you're picking are ones that resonate for your audience, right? So it doesn't have to resonate with everybody else. It has to be who are the people that you're trying to change or you're trying to move on this arc, and does it resonate for them? And so that's the same thing for the future, that like there are lots of different versions of the future, and your vision of the future may not be the one that resonates with someone else's.
We often think about what are like kind of the existing pockets. We know we haven't gotten there yet, but are there pockets that show things that might, how they might work? I love seeing, being able to show what actually happened in Minneapolis, I think is a great example of communities coming together and what kind of individuals like Clive, have done already.
Yes, we love solutions journalism. Exactly. Like, how are we showing the solutions in the future we're working towards?
I agree, Susie. It is hopeful, but it is also very tiring. But hopefully there's kind of a path forward that we have. And I know like so many of you and the organizations that you're working with here are doing this work already. All right. So with that, that's the bulk of our research. And our research and the questions for advocates are there to help you expand your reach and engagement through your storytelling while helping, again, increase people's sense of imagination for democracy. And we're going to kind of open it up to questions. But before we do, I just want to take a moment to go back to the first two polls that we have. And that is, I understand my audience beyond traditional demographics. And if we can see the results for that. All right, so we have a few more kind of like the agree and strongly agree. And the second poll is I know how to design messages or campaigns that increase people's sense of agency and imagination for the future. And if we can see responses there as well. All right. And so we're getting a little bit more stronger on the agree side. So hopefully this will help. And if you can kind of, if you want to sit with it and come back to us with any questions, we'll be happy to answer them either kind of in the next 20 minutes or later on. My email is in the document that you're going to be getting, and it's on the screen right now. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Piper.
Right. Thank you so much. I really appreciate all you just shared and appreciate everybody for active conversation in the chat. Rest assured, we will share resources after the webinar and a follow-up email. And so where you want to dive more deeply into different terms, into the research, you will definitely have an opportunity. I'd love to introduce Aditi. Thank you for joining us. We are joined today by Aditi, Juneja, who is the Executive Director of Democracy 2076. She founded the organization in 2023, working long-term to change our constitution, our political culture, and political parties. Previously, she was Chief of Staff at the Movement Voter Project, and prior to that, spent 4 years at Protect Democracy, where she led the work of the National Task Force on election crises. Her writing has been featured in Vox, NPR, and Talking Points Memo, and she received her JD from NYU Law and a BA from Connecticut College. So welcome, Aditi. Glad that you are with us for this portion, and we will dive right into the questions. I'd love to pose one to you first. If advocates were to do one thing today after this session to better align their storytelling with how the people they're trying to reach already see the world, what would it be?
I think there are maybe two answers. One is really understanding what are the heroes and the hero arcs that people need that are different from maybe what you find inspiring. I think one of the more challenging things for me when we did this research was like, I love The West Wing. I was like, oh, we need more of The West Wing. And when we did this research, we found that for a lot of audiences, it actually moved them backwards on feeling a sense of agency and optimism for the future because they were like, oh, it's already working. We don't need to do
Mm,
anything. And so I think really being kind of clear about how different audiences need different types of stories than you do is really the core thing to take from this. Otherwise, you're just going to be talking to people who already agree with you.
yeah. Oh, I appreciate that so much. And it's so easy. I mean, we all live in our own, our own heads, our own bubbles, and it's easy to think, well, everybody sees things the same way I do. And I feel that like in our communication space, in the democracy communications in particular, and thanks to your work, we're better remembering that everyone has very different experiences and may see things differently. So thank you for this tangible research that puts that into practice. There's a question that we had, let's see, more of maybe a suggestion, but is the upcoming George Washington inspired biopic, would that make Washington an outsider transformer? Do either of you have thoughts on that?
I actually have been following this film. So it's an
Okay.
interesting one because I think, again, we kind of think about George Washington as an insider within government. And I think the way this part of his life is shown, he's definitely an outsider. Now, I think we'll all have to kind of watch and decide whether he's kind of going to a transformation or a restoration. But I think it's a great example of how we can take this lens and apply it to kind of real content, and then how we talk about that character that someone or that figure of history that people are already familiar with and connect it to their current kind of wishes for government and society.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, oh, great. Thank you, everybody. I've seen a lot of questions coming into the Q&A. If you put those there, it's helpful for us to see and bring out from a very active chat today. So let me start. Let's see. I guess these two look like they're related. I'll start, Katya and Gwen. Thank you. Do you have any tips to proceed if you don't, this is a good one. If you don't know your audience, if you don't know the people that you're trying to reach, we have a behavior change initiative that someone is trying to start, and it's still growing. Ultimately, the goal is for every person, well, every person in the world. Good luck. Obviously, they'll never reach the won't reach that. But I have ideas to segment messaging based on possible audience. Do you have any other tips for getting started when you don't yet have that audience? And I
I
guess, and I'll follow up. Sorry, Aditi, but to follow up, what's a simple way to start getting to know your audience more deeply than simple demographics?
So I think there are two possible approaches here. If you are someone who has already been putting out content, we worked with a content creator who had already done a bunch of on the street interviews. What you might do is look at your current content and see what types of heroes are you profiling? What types of stories are you already telling? So that was a person who did want to reach all Americans. And when he actually mapped who he was interviewing onto this, he realized that he was really only featuring outsiders, which meant that the audience that he was attracting to his content were people who like outsiders. So you don't have to start by knowing your audience. You could start by looking at your content and trying to think through who might be naturally attracted to that. And I think that might be true for the behavior change initiative as well, that if you think about the type of behavior change you're trying to bring about, if you're trying to increase voting, that's necessarily going to lead you to talking to people who are more insider oriented, people who are more outsider oriented, particularly that autonomy crowd tend to be low propensity voters. Um, Now you might decide, and I'm not saying that for Katya, you're definitely thinking about voting. I'm just giving it as an example, that if you're like, well, actually, my goal is to increase voting, then you might actually do the opposite. You might want to really focus on low propensity voters and really try to pay attention to what are the stories and the arcs that motivate them. And so I think I think there are different ways to do this. Even if you don't currently have an audience or don't have a ton of information about your audience, you can actually enter this by being attentive to what are the stories you're telling, what is the work that you're already doing, and who is that likely to attract.
I'd love to put in a quick plug for our friends at Protect Democracy, where you mentioned the low propensity voters, and there's some research that they just issued around Gen Z and the stories that some folks are saying, like, being disengaged. And their research dives in more deeply and says, actually, it's the story of what we think of democracy and it not working that is really hitting Gen Z. I think that was a not a clear way to put that. Let me try that again. People are interpreting lack of engagement as lack of enthusiasm, and they're saying actually Gen Z does still support democracy, but not this version of it. So it's worth diving in and thinking a bit more when we see people who aren't voting. What story are we telling ourselves or aren't as engaged civically? Like, what story are we telling ourselves about their why? Does that make sense?
Yeah, sort of, but I think this is where it's important to be really clear about what your goals are, right? So if your goal is to get people to vote, then of course you want to understand more about why a community might not be voting, which that research sounds like would be really helpful for. But if your goal is to get people to be civically engaged, then you might not care whether or not they vote. And what you might actually be saying is Gen Z is extremely civically engaged. They just
Mhm.
don't vote because they don't believe in the system. They're more on that outsider side. So outsiders are still civically engaged. They just may be engaging with systems differently than the way insiders are. And I think it really depends on what the goal of your work is. I think I'd love to take Madeline's question if we could ask
Mhm.
Melody,
Yeah.
is it a bad idea to try and reach a wide audience, multiple types of audiences?
Not a bad idea, but it's just about being realistic of what you can do. We know there's no one universal story. Again, it's all about different audiences are drawn to different heroes and types of stories. So trying to be authentic, and you won't be able to do that with like trying to get all four, let's say, quadrants. One thing you can do is, again, if you want to not just hit one quadrant, is are they like, what are the quadrants next to each other? So let's say, can you tell a story with insiders? That's one both for restoration, kind of more law and order crowd, and a transformation. So I think a teacher, for example, can they fit kind of both of those roles and trying to get them there? Or if you're trying to kind of reach like younger people, are you trying to give those stories of transformation and go with both an insider and outsider? Um, One example, I think I brought up, we brought up Mayor Mamdani before, but I think one thing that he was able to do is bring in both surrogates and even the way he used language to talk about kind of transformation and restoration. So New York for, being able to affordability for New York taking it back to a time when New York was affordable for everyone, as well as kind of transforming New York. So you can think of it, I think, in those kind of ways.
Yeah, but I think if you have a limited set of resources, I mean, I think you could reach multiple audiences if you have multiple channels to reach those audiences. But I think particularly with the way algorithms work right now, if we're talking about social media in particular, you're gonna find your content is going to get very flat very fast. Like it's not going to get pushed out because the algorithm's not going to know who to push it out to if you're jumping around talking to different audiences. And to Melody's point, it's not going to feel authentic to people if you don't have a consistent voice, right? It would be very strange if sometimes you're like, Donald Trump is great. Actually, Joe Biden is great. Like that's going to be weird to people. And I'm being a bit facetious and like those are two very different hero types, but it's that is your posture to change, that change comes from the outside the system or inside the system? Is it transformation or restoration? There are ways you can sort of do both, but if you're jumping around too much, I think you don't attract a steady and consistent audience because audiences choose to watch content where they resonate with the hero archetype. And so like that's why you stay with a specific influencer or you watch crime procedurals over and over again, right? Like you're staying in the category or in the genre. Um, but if it jumps around too much, you lose audience in the process.
Yeah, it's really helpful. I think a lot of people understand where we're looking at things coming out of Hollywood or more in entertainment media, that the types and so to liken that to the people where we're trying to reach, it would you wouldn't, as you're saying, go from the drama to, a lighthearted rom-com and expect the same people to like it. And yet sometimes I think in our communications we do. It's because it's coming from our organization, then everybody should resonate. And your research is saying, no, we really need to be more intentional. There was a comment in the chat that really stood out to me. I'd love to dive in. Tina mentioned, thinking about Winnie the Pooh as an unlikely potential hero. What do you think about that? Someone who's more milling about and a bit less active. Is there a potential for a hero in someone like that?
I think so. I think we actually, I think Didi mentioned that Winnie the Pooh. I need to go watch the latest movie from a few years ago. That apparently it's a great organizing movie. I think that is again, they don't have to be real people, but that's an ensemble cast. That's about different types of heroes or protagonists working together for something. So again, taking inspiration from those places, that stories and characters that people are drawn to is really helpful.
Yeah. And Katya has this question of to reach different audiences, you need to have different and distinct messengers.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
It was a question, so I was going to ask Melody, what do
Oh,
you?
Oh, sorry.
absolutely.
That was a statement.
No,
No, no, no, it was a question.
I
Sorry.
think you do because I think you need to think about what's the medium, where are they on? Like, are they, on TikTok? Are they on Instagram? Are they watching the local news, going to the movies? What's kind of the message that they're drawn to, and who is their messenger? And it will be different.
Mhm. That's something we talk a lot about in our learning communities, especially where, as much as I would love to live in a world where everyone listens to everyone else's voice, that is not the world we're in, and increasingly less so. So as frustrating as it may be, thinking about, if you have a good message, if it's not coming from someone that the people you're trying to reach will listen to, and not only listen to, but trust, which is a whole different conversation where we're moving from not just an attention economy, but this trust economy, then you may be wasting someone's breath. So really matching that message and messenger is so important.
And I also see this question about the buddy films and the multiple heroes.
Mhm.
I think that definitely works, but again, thinking for your audience. So as someone who is kind of it's in that tough cookies, that's that lower left-hand quadrant, I'm in that community. Well, community is not that crowd, but that we, that collective, that likes the collective. So for those two audiences, those ensembles really work. But for the people on the right-hand side who are more in the individualistic, there are ways to do it, but it's not necessarily kind of, you have to be really mindful of how you're doing it. So again, trying, recognizing that the different needs for the different audiences.
And then Giselle has this question of how do you integrate semantics into your research, as in statements about the same thing, but using different semantics for different audiences?
Want to make sure I get that. If we're talking about things like, not using the term democracy, but like what is really democracy about? It's about the rule of the majority, having people's opinions heard. Like, I think you can do that because if that term is going to bump for people, there's no point in kind of like pressing and being like, no, you have to like understand this definition. And then going from there, that maybe gradually you'll change that idea. But I don't know if DT, you have other thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think this way of thinking about it is a way of thinking about messaging, but not about storytelling. Because when you talk about messaging, you might change a word you use, right? You might use the word freedom instead of the word democracy. You might use the word hope instead of the word imagination because it resonates with different audiences. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about storytelling. And so that means your story needs to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. So it needs to have a problem, an action, and a future in it. And you can't like and different audiences are going to need different arcs. What you could think about is that for different audience, you could be talking about the same problem but highlight different actions for different audiences, right? So it might be that for if the problem is economic instability, for some audiences the hero that you feature is an insider transformer, for others it's an outsider restorer. But that even means the main character is going to be different in your story. And then necessarily the action they take is going to be different. Is it someone who's trying to pass a piece of legislation like Elizabeth Warren, or is it someone who is organizing mutual aid in their community, right? Those are different narratives. So it doesn't work the same way as messaging where you're substituting out a word here or there in your paid media campaign because the protagonist, the character is different, and then necessarily the actions they take are different, and the way they talk about the future they're trying to build is different. And that's needed for different audiences because they have different preferences and different versions of this will resonate with them.
I am mindful of time. Our hour always flies by. So this may be our last question, and others will aim to answer LinkedIn or in follow-up elsewhere. But so 2026, we are focused on helping people build civic muscle, and we've touched on many different things today. So I'd like to make it a takeaway clear. Would you say to someone who asks, how can I be part of making the United States more just and peaceful for everyone without exception for the next 250?
To do something. And I would say, no, literally, we have a big problem in the United States of political hobbyism. My dad is like this. He reads and consumes a ton of information and he doesn't do anything. This is a really big problem in our politics right now. People treat politics like entertainment. So you should do something. And I would say that the more local what you're doing is, the higher the chance of success and the more impact you're going to feel. So the antidote to anxiety is action. So I would say take action, and I would encourage people to actually consume less content, like consume only what you're taking action on. I haven't read climate change content in many years because it's not what I work on and it just makes me anxious. And so that's not a call for us being less informed or misinformed. It's really about like being politics is something you do. It is not something you watch. And so, like, what are you doing in your politics? I think if everyone was doing something, we would be in a very different position.
I so appreciate that, Aditi. Like, politics is something you do, not something you watch. And we saw some really encouraging examples in the chat. I'll also include some from Braver Angels in the follow-up. And that's a plug. If anybody else would like to make the shameless plug of something that is helpful, we will share that with the group following up on the recording. Melody, anything that you would add?
I think helping people imagine something better. What are those different visions? And again, not everyone will have the same vision, but offering that, because we mentioned the chat earlier was about hope, that if we can't see the thing that we're working towards, it becomes really hard. So can we show them what the options are and not just say like, hey, things are really broken, I don't know what to do. But in order to take that action, you also have to have hope that things can get better. And what does that better look like? And can we share that, especially as we're telling more stories?
I was listening just today to a podcast on reimagining democracy, and they talk about the role of joy and hope. So I will add that to what I feel is a growing list of resources. We are coming up on time. Thank you both so much, not just for today, but all the work that you are doing to support the broader pro-democracy movement. We will include chat links in the chat to more dig in deeply. This is fabulous work, everybody, as you can tell already. We will also put a code to our Storytelling to Bridge Divides course in the chat. That code is valid for only 2 uses per course, so jump on that if it is of interest to you. Our next webinar is coming up June 5th, which is also National Gun Violence Awareness Day. You'll have a chance to hear about conversations with gun-owning parents who bought firearms to protect their families and lessons that you can learn from that to inform your own work. That will be with Sarah Isaac of Marketing for Change. Lastly, your feedback matters. Share your thoughts. There's a 15-second poll that will pop up when you log off. Thank you for letting us know your thoughts. Until next time, everyone, be well, do good, stay happy, and hopeful.